So let me introduce now His Excellency Tony Abbott, who is the former Prime Minister of Australia, advisor to the UK Board of Trade, somebody who knows what he's talking about. I'm sorry now, this is not only a double-barreled name, this is a quadruple name. Hugo Antonio Acha-Melgar Christensen,
well said.
Who is the director of the Foundation for Human Rights in Cuba. And we often neglect Cuba. You know, Cuba's there somewhere. It's an American problem, though it was so closely linked to the Soviet Union. And has Cuba figured much in Ukrainian thinking in the last 30 years? Probably not. Anyway, and we have the very renowned Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, a Ukrainian lawmaker, a veteran. Did I pronounce it right?
No.
Please.
But I'm used to that.
Tsintsadze. Tsintsadze, I apologize. Tsintsadze, who is a long-standing, campaigner for Ukraine's integration into European structures, and not only, and a very formidable and competent ambassador of Ukraine in the outside world. And she's chair of the Committee of Ukraine's integration into the EU in the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament. So look, I'm going to be provocative and ask each one of you with your opening statements, how do we find this? How do we define this other world? Is it the southern hemisphere? Is it BRICS? Is it the nefarious axis of Russia, North Korea, China, Iran, and others? Is it where do prime ministers from Hungary, Slovakia, and others fit in Europe? What are we talking about when we talk about the other world? So from your perspective, each one of you from the countries that you come from, and in a more global sense, what is this other world that the organizers have asked us to talk about? Would you go first, Mr. Abbott, or I can give it to someone?
Well, look, I'm very happy to have a go at it. And you're right, it was a somewhat nebulous topic. But I can tell you from the part of the world where I live, Ukraine is an incredibly heroic, interesting and important place, because Ukraine is the front line of freedom. And yes, the struggle has been going on now for more than 2 years, and yes, it's very hard to keep people's attention, and yes, we're distracted by other things that happen in the world, like the Middle East and so on. But as long as Ukraine is resisting this evil aggression from a dictator on the march, it will be a place that fascinates millions of people in my country, and a place that millions of people in my country are desperate to see supported. And one of the things that disappoints me as a former Australian leader is that we are not doing enough to help Ukraine, and I'm here because I want us to do more, and the least I can do is demonstrate personal solidarity with a gallant people struggling to be free, in the hope that more of my countrymen take up this call and do more themselves.
Okay, Tony, your 5 minutes are not up yet. No. You've still got 2.5, 3 minutes. But the other world, what are we talking about? What are the divisions you see from Australia in the world today?
Okay, well, we hear a lot about this global south. And to be honest, it's a phrase which is mobilised by people who feel that they are on the outer and they want to be on the inner. And it's particularly deployed by some countries that feel they are not taken as seriously as they should be, and they are looking for some way of gaining friends themselves. Now, you ask yourself, what is going to help the countries that currently feel insufficiently respected and insufficiently benefiting from all the good things the world has to offer? Is it sidling up to China? No. Is it sucking up to Russia? No. Because we in Australia absolutely know that the Chinese do nothing that is not absolutely in their national interest. The Chinese will use people by all means, but as a polity, I'm talking now not about Chinese people, I'm talking about the Chinese system, but as a polity, there's no sense of disinterested philanthropy in the Chinese government, the way, for all its faults, there has long been in the American system. I mean, look at what America did for Europe after the Second World War. Look at what Britain has attempted to do for the world over a long period of time. I mean, we have to be honest with ourselves and accept that the modern world is as free, as fair, as safe and as rich as it is because America, primarily, but other countries, including the NATO countries, have spent money and blood to keep it that way, and long may that be the case, because it would be a much darker world but for that.
Very eloquently put. Now, Hugo, if I may, I remember working for Amnesty International in 78, 82, and I was focusing on Soviet political prisoners, but there were plenty of Cuban prisoners of conscience, as we used to call them, that not so much attention was paid to in the West. Today, from the perspective of you as a human rights campaigner, why is Ukraine relevant, and why should it not interfere but overlap with your work in defense of people closer home?
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank the organizers of this event, because it's going to provide us with an opportunity that it's unique, and this is to reach a global audience. You're talking about Cuban political prisoners. Right now, with us, there is a former political prisoner herself, Carolina Barrero, who was held in prison by the regime. So if you could
please stand up. Let's see you. Don't be so anonymous. Thank you.
So what we have here is a living testimony of what exactly you are asking about. And here is my introduction to your question. Probably the greatest chess player of all times, Raul Capablanca, said, "Never start a game without the end game in mind." And since we have a chess knight here, I want to be clear here. The democratic West has not thought about this question until today. We have not the end game in mind. The other side, they do. Because you said something at the beginning, neglecting Cuba. One of our challenges as a human rights organization has been to advocate for Ukraine, because the words Irpin and Bucha resonate to us in the same level as the political prisoners that are persecuted, tortured, and assassinated within the island. And here's my answer to that, and that's my initial probably provocation and food for thought. Probably few of you know that right now there are more than 3,000 Cubans fighting for Russia in the war of aggression against Ukraine. Probably very few of you know that the propaganda war that is waged on the Western Hemisphere against you is coordinated, organized, and executed by the Cuban regime. Probably even fewer of you know that the financial movements that allow the Russian regime to bypass sanctions are being facilitated by the Cubans. So that's some food for thought in terms of fighting for a common global cause that includes human rights and democracy.
Thank you very much, Hugo, but I'm not going to let you off the hook there. These are very important insights, but broaden it a little bit. Central America, Latin America, as we generally call it. Why the susceptibility of many of them to take Russia's narratives and do business with them, etc., etc. Do they not see your predicament? Do they not solidarize with you?
The main reason, and my colleague Eric Artelli aptly put just a few minutes ago, it's about shaping the narrative. And in order to understand that, you need to understand that the illicit circuits on a global scale right now are helping our enemies. Most of the drug trafficking performed in Latin America right now, it's propelling the coffers of these regimes. The money laundering performed by Havana, by Beijing, by Moscow, are actually facilitating aggressions like the one ongoing here and are actually allowing the Cuban regime to survive the worst crisis for the Cuban people, but not for the repressive apparatus. So the problem there is that we have not been careful in protecting democracy in the Western Hemisphere. We have seen democracy shrinking. Latin America right now, you cannot, in all good conscience, say that we have a continent that is by a far cry a democratic one. So that's a consequence of our own blindness to these changes.
Okay, later I'll ask you about decolonization, and Latin America knows what that means, and yet. All right, I'm moving on to Ivanna. Okay, we've heard the perspective from, a Western perspective from the deep southeast of the globe, if I may call Australia that. We've heard from down under. Let's hear from the middle. We've heard from Central America. Perspectives from Ukraine, the outside world, who's who? Why is it that we have such strong support from our NATO partners, from our EU, American, Canadian, Japanese, etc., but why not only the BRICS, even those who consider themselves as democracy, India, the largest democracy on the planet, they like to call themselves, why the indifference or the hostility?
I also was thinking, what are we going to talk about in this particular panel? And you are helping us to shape that. Thank you. And I was thinking what you were asking at the very beginning, what is the outer world, right? And what is the other world? And I thought that maybe we are going to talk about so-called Global South, as I do believe that Ukraine does belong to the West. And I think that with all our, aspirations, with all our actions, we have proven that we have the right to go back to our roots. However, and when you think about the problems that we are having with this so-called global, very diverse Global South, I think we are seeing that there is a problem on the global level between the problem of communication, of relationship between so-called Global West and Global South. And I think that Ukrainian issues that we have right now with not getting through with some of our messages are also stemming from those particular problems, and they are the consequences of those global problems. And I think that we have to understand and finally be very honest with ourselves about one thing. To understand that we probably should not try to impose something that we believe in on others. And we just have to admit that some nations, some people, some countries just do not, are not susceptible to what we believe in. And we probably, I was thinking of some politicians that were speaking out recently, and I think it was Hillary Clinton who said, well, the West has a problem because the West does not want to see with their, to believe what they are seeing with their eyes. Then Theresa May said, well, probably it was a mistake that we have believed that this, in 90s, when we were trying to go through economic, to work through economic integration of Russian Federation, that somehow we can make them accept our beliefs and our values. Then I think it was Victoria Nuland in the last interview which she gave as an official. She said, well, it was a mistake to believe that we can integrate into our value-based system those who are authoritarian, who are dictatorial through the economic means. So we just have to accept that there is a division, we and they. I think we have to accept that and go beyond the value-based system, go to basics that we have agreed upon in that very, very incapable right now organizations like the UN, the basics of the international law and the territorial integrity, and then question, okay, can we get together around something that maybe will be resonating with everyone? And that's my suggestion of maybe finding any platform on something that might be valuable for wider audience, not through our values and not through this economic integration mechanism. Because I believe, I'm sorry, just one sentence, that it was the West who has invested in growing such autocracies like the Russian autocracy and or Chinese autocracy.
Right, thank you. I'm going to open it up to the panelists here. And I was trying to get my thoughts together to run this session, and I asked some Norwegian colleagues, and I said, well, okay, what divides the world and what should unite it? Divides us what? Authoritarian democratic systems, values, as you mentioned, pragmatism, crude self-interest, but different traditions, different levels of development. But what unites us? And I hadn't thought of it, but you've just mentioned the same thing as they did, my Norwegian colleagues, thank you. They said, well, let's start with having agreement on a rules-based international system. Do we have that, at least as a starting point? It seems we don't. But how would you look at, on what basis can we build that unity and eventually also introduce Ukraine, Gaza, Cuba, whatever? The rules-based system, or are there other magical formulas? Which one of you would like to go first?
Well, the one formula which should work universally is treat others as you would have them treat you. I mean, this is the golden rule of ethical conduct, and I don't think there's a human being alive who wouldn't concede when push comes to shove that he or she should treat others as he or she would expect and hope to be treated in return. So I should not steal from you because you should not steal from me. I should not bully you because I don't want you to bully me. I should respect you because I demand respect in turn from you. So I think this is the rule, and one of the reasons why I think Ukraine is actually doing incredibly well when it comes to global public support, if you like, is because this is the paradigm case of a big country bullying a small country. And you can only have contempt for a big person who starts picking on a small person, and this is why I think Vladimir Putin is the most contemptible leader alive today.
Thank you. I'd like to hear more views. I'm a bit skeptical, with all due respect, Tony, because it sounds too utopian, everybody respecting each other. I mean, it's not the law of the jungle, but everybody wants to get ahead, push others aside, economies, states, etc. And
everyone wants the system a little bit weighted towards them, but at the end of the day, I don't think anyone wants a system where they fear they're going to be completely screwed over.
Would anybody else like to add to this? Any other thoughts?
I would like to add something from the perspective, again, of the other side. And I'm going to quote two Chinese colonels, Wang Zhangsui and Kuo Lian, which have penned a book that is basically the cornerstone of Chinese security in terms of their policy. And there is a very interesting concept in there. They believe that legality, as we understand it, it's a Western imposition that avoids China to reach their strategic goals. So that's quite something if you think about a challenge to our conception of what legality is. So if we are thinking on a rule-based international system, the other side is not quite playing along. While we are doing this again, we must understand that Tehran, Moscow, Beijing, Havana are not playing by the same rules, and they are using our system to their own benefit.
Ivanna, would you like to comment?
Maybe just add to what Hugo was saying. We are discussing today a lot about this war, and I've heard many times already in this whole event today that this, Ukrainian nation has been such a brave nation for a little bit more than 2 years. This war is ongoing on its 11th year of this war, and it took this brutal, full-scale aggression for the world, or at least part of the world, to wake up. So when we were trying, and I remember, going to our partners, like I remember one of the conversations in Sweden somewhere in 2016, when I was trying to explain that, when we are trying to analyze how they will be reacting further or acting further, we should not come from our common sense. We should not come from our logic. We should just try to imagine unimaginable. And then maybe we're getting closer to projection how these enemies of ours will be acting. People were not ready to hear that and accept that and act upon this notion. And that's exactly that. We are just coming from a different set of logic, common sense, and rules, and even instincts. And that brings me even back to the Revolution of Dignity. When we were out in the streets during the Revolution of Dignity back in 2014, we were thinking that, well, this Yanukovych, he has to have some self-preservation instinct and should not attack his own people. That could have actually saved his, his presidency, basically, and could not evolved in such a big tragedy. And obviously we were wrong, because we were judging him on what we believe in. And that's exactly what is happening right now, that we are misjudging their actions and predicting wrongly what they are going to do. And we just have to imagine unimaginable. When we get to that point, we will be much stronger, much more capable, much more efficient in thinking through how we can act in order to prevent the worst case situations.
Thank you. Early warning for the audience. 2 more questions here, and then I'll throw it open to the floor. A little bit more provocative. Does Ukraine want to be part of the remainder of the world, of a broader world, if it means, together with the despots and the self-interested and whatever, define as you please. And linked to that is, has Ukraine up to now, in your different perceptions, shown enough interest in the outside world other than its immediate auxiliaries, partners, allies to be? For example, India, Brazil, Cuba, as I've said, Australia, etc., etc. Now it's forced to in recent years. But is it something it will have to catch up with, or is already catching up with, and the future rebuilt Ukraine will have to be much more open to the outside world and less insular? Who would like to go first?
Maybe
insular in the sense of introspective.
Maybe I'll start. Definitely we as Ukraine diplomatically have not shown, diplomatically, economically, proactively have not shown a lot of interest in much wider geographical areas than the European continent or Euro-Atlantic community. But you know what? I'll tell you that, well, at least something that I know very well. Even during last 10 years, we've been trying to get ourselves back on the cultural, political, geographical, linguistic, if you want to the map of Europe. not to mention that we should have done this with the whole world. It was quite a task. Russia has, we were talking about propaganda machinery, but Russia has been successfully stealing our history, successfully stealing our identity, successfully erasing this in all these cultural efforts of Ruski Mir, ballets and literature masters and so on. So we were not visible. So during the war, Ukraine has started to bring itself to recognize itself subjectively. I think that that's also part of our, self-identification, and then presenting itself to at least closer world. And definitely we would have to do much more work with other regions. But it's also true that, some of the things that we can present and we can be interested with, they are not necessarily well taken. I liked in the previous panel when Hanna was saying, because I was thinking about that as well, that when you're trying to explain to African nations that we once were a jewel of empire in the Russian Empire, and now empire has gone mad and wants to get us back, that this is colonial war against Ukraine, they are saying, well, it cannot be so because it cannot be the war between whites and whites. Sorry for being politically incorrect, of that type, of conquering colonial war. So it will be difficult for us without our own recognition of what we are, how we are, without at least immediate neighborhood or Western, if you wish, Western world world recognition that we exist, and that we have something to offer to the world to go further. But we should be trying.
Right. So, Ivanna, I get what you're saying. You're saying this war has precipitated Ukraine's getting its own act together and its own self-identification together and better arming it to deal with the outside world.
I do believe that was a necessity to present ourselves and to explain ourselves in the world, and through that war, actually, that was speeding up the process to an extent, but also making it more difficult as well, because we were coming to the kind of desert of not understanding. And that just leads me to the question. When I was studying in the US back in 1993 in Montana, someone asked me where I'm from, and I said from Ukraine. At that point, the guy said, this is somewhere the island in the Baltic Sea. I thought, wow, this is good, at least Baltic Sea, that's close enough geographically, right. But we as an island, that was a difficult thing to explain. So we've gone the long way.
Americans don't normally know where Australia is either.
I'll give it that.
Please, Tony, if you want to take over for a second.
Look, I detect some people wanting to impose their neo-Marxist stereotypes onto the Ukraine thing and say, as you said, Ivanna, well, because it's whites versus whites, it can't be a colonial struggle. But it's certainly an imperial struggle, because this is Moscow attempting to retake what it sees as one of the provincial capitals. That's exactly how it is for Moscow. It's an imperial struggle. So there actually should be a great deal of sympathy for Ukraine with all of those people who have emerged from the yoke of another country, and certainly in India, which I know pretty well. I absolutely accept that official India has tried to avoid obviously taking sides, but the Indian public are under no illusions about what's going on here. And every thoughtful Indian appreciates that what's going on against Ukraine is a monstrosity. It's just that because they continue to need Russian gas and because they still need Russian spare parts for some of their old military kit, they feel that they cannot readily, on an entirely pragmatic and I guess self-interested ground, do other than sit on the fence.
But that pragmatic interest also has led European nations to a trap when they thought that it's okay to be dependent on the Russian gas and that they need that cheap Russian gas. So I wish the nations would be able to learn from experience of others. When we were explaining that cheap gas is only in the, in the mousetrap, nobody wanted to listen to us. When we were explaining that Nord Stream 2 is totally geopolitical and project and doesn't have anything to do with the economy, our colleagues quite frequently, our partners were looking away. And so that's exactly something, this pragmatic interest for India that seems useful today might lead them to the situation when, when their lives, their security, their basic needs will be threatened, and it will be again too late. And so I don't know how to get this message across. But I think when we are hearing and appreciating that much help that we are receiving from so many countries, we are grateful for what is being done. But it's important to understand this is not charity. We are not asking for charity. It's an investment in your own well-being for every single nation that is standing with Ukraine. So therefore, I find it, hard to explain that, to accept that pragmatic interest is something that should lead to the position of the country to allow other people to be killed.
Thanks, Ivanna. Hugo, anything to add before the last question from me?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm going to beat both of my colleagues to the punch. Being a person born in Bolivia, representing a Cuban organization, and now being a US citizen, you can ask me a lot of questions about what the answers were the first time an American asked me where Bolivia was actually located in the globe. And you are not going to like the answers. Going back to two of the points, we're talking about imperialism as if it were a concept that is monopolic to the West. And it is not. Look at China. Ask an Uyghur. Look at what's going on right now in Ukraine. Ask your soldiers in the front line if they are not repelling an imperialistic aggression. You want another example? It's not only about whites on whites. Do you know what's the greatest humanitarian tragedy in the world right now? 8 million Venezuelans that have been forced out of their country, occupied by a colonial power. Do you know the name of that power? It's Cuba. They have turned one of the most prosperous and rich nations in the world into basically a wasteland. So that's something that we must consider. This relativism is something that we must fight, because you have earned the right, forced in war, to call yourselves a nation, to have your place in the international concert. But then again, we need to understand that the other side is not playing by those rules. One final example. As we speak, we have a nuclear submarine harbored in Havana. We have the Admiral Gorshov frigate with missiles capable to reach most relevant cities in the eastern US seaboard. What? Because we have chosen to ignore these players. And now this ignorance have come back and it's biting us in the rear. I'm being politically correct here.
Okay. Think about it. Anyway, one more question and then we throw it open to the floor. Okay, let's prizemlimoся troška, as they say. Let's get down to earth again. We're in, what is this beautiful city called? Odesa. Let's talk about Odesa and its significance for the outside world. Do you feel that Odesa, because of the grain corridor, because of the reports about its bombing, about Russian aspirations to capture it, etc., has, through Odesa, people have learned more about Ukraine and its history. So the significance of Odesa and our forum today. Who'd like to go first? Don't all shout at once.
Well, okay. Listen, probably, and that goes back to the previous questions, people around the world had a tough time locating your city in a map. That has changed. Because when they ask Africans why all of a sudden their grains were not arriving or their prices were skyrocketing, all of a sudden they learned where Odesa was. When we are talking about global economy, when we are still dreaming about that global village, you probably remember Al Gore, we must remember that we are talking about certain concepts that our Prime Minister here defined. Rule of law. If you do not have rule of law, you cannot have democracy. If you don't have that, then you don't believe in a future for a country like Ukraine. Because it's only by enforcing that rule of law and supporting it in Western values that we're going to be able to protect Odesa and Ukraine from the other side. Because the other side has its end game very clear. They want to wipe out what you represent. It's not about a simple political question. When imperialism, true imperialism, come to play, they want assimilation. They want annihilation. Do you remember the Soviet Union? Russification? Does that word ring a bell? That's what we are facing right now.
Ivanna?
Well, obviously, the war has put Odesa on the map of many more people and minds across the globe. But before that, there was also another battle with regard to what is Odesa? Is Odesa a symbol of the Russian imperial pride, or Odesa is a Ukrainian city, multicultural, rich, Ukrainian port, able to provide for...
With a great sense of humor.
With the incredible sense of humor and so on. So definitely, while exploring where and what Odesa is, right now, with this brutal war, we are getting the chance to actually give it also a Ukrainian vibration, so to say, a Ukrainian voice. And I think that that is also important for us Ukrainians, as it is important also for the world.
And to rediscover, for that matter, even Italian, French roots, not simply Russian, Turkic, etc.
Multicultural, yeah. Greek, yeah.
Right. Okay. Tony, anything to add?
Well, it's a pleasure to be in Odesa, and I hope it's not my last trip.
Okay, listen, I'm going to throw there's some important person at the front here wants to say a word. What's your name, sir? Okay, please, your phone. Mr. MP Honcharenko.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to tell you, brilliant panel, but I have a question to Hugo. I think it's very important because what's happening, you said, now Russian nuclear submarine, they say without nuclear weapons. Who knows? Who checked this? Is in Havana. Today Putin said that my ultimatum to Ukraine, leave these so-called our new territories, including the left bank, including the right bank of Dnieper River, including Zaporizhia and Kherson and so on, and be no NATO, no nuclear power. It's clear that it's part of the same game. A threat near, just when you see from Key West, you can see Havana just by your eyes. And at the same time, some ultimatums to Ukraine. It's clear the game is so obvious. So my question is, so that shows that the world is united completely. What's happening here in Odesa is so much united today with what's happening in Havana just this moment. But the question is how it had happened that we don't see one another. That when Ukraine is saying about Iran, about North Korea, about Belarus, when always not mentioning Cuba. And when even in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, I raised the issue that let us put Cuba as an ally of Russia in this axis of evil, like many people were just saying, we can't understand why Cuba, what's Cuba? And at the same time, so this is our problem from European side and Ukrainian side, but at the same time, my question to you, how it managed that also from another side it's not seen. For example, Cuban senators, Cruz, Rubio, didn't vote for support of Ukraine. Didn't vote. When we are natural allies, when we will win over this axis of evil, it will not just be liberation of Ukraine, but this will be liberation of Cuba, right? So that's the question. And what can we do? Because we try now to do it here. Sorry for long story, but this is so important. And how can we continue to do this in order to see one another and to help one another? Thank you.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for your question. I'll try to be as brief as possible. The first concept that we must understand, both in Europe and the United States, is that we forgot the Cold War and its lessons. We forgot that the people trained by the KGB were still there. That the concept of putting together illicit economies and political purpose in the creation and the birth of the Foro de Sao Paulo was not by accident. The concept that right now, let me give you just one example, and you do not need to take my word for it. In 2019, Nick Patton, CNN journalist, revealed that coming out of Venezuela, 240 tons of cocaine reached the US. The origin of this cocaine, Colombian FARC. The coordinators for this operation, Cuban intelligence. The end game of this operation, $32 billion that were used to propel the aggression that you're suffering today, the October 7 attack against Israel, and other operations. Don't take my word for it. Go use the internet and double check, and you're going to find that. So the concept is that we must remember those lessons, because the guys that are fighting right now on the front lines, those Cuban soldiers, are not there by accident. They are trafficked there for a purpose. That regime, as per the Trafficking in Persons report of the United States State Department, it's one of 11 countries that commit human trafficking with their own population. So we have been blind to this. I already said the reasons why. We need to awake, we need to coordinate, we need to find that common ground to see what is actually uniting us in the defense of democracy, freedom, and human rights.
Okay, thank you, Hugo. I'm going to take some more questions, but Tony, I'm going to ask you a question just off the cuff. We haven't mentioned Taiwan. You're in Australia. Is Taiwan, China, more of a sort of pressing, burning issue than Ukraine far away in Europe somewhere?
Well, I think we can be absolutely certain that if Putin wins here, Xi will be emboldened to attack Taiwan. I think there's an arc of dictatorship. They're acting in an effective alliance, even if it's an alliance of convenience. And if one dictator gets away with it, another dictator will think, yep, I can get away with it too.
Thank you. Please, question there. The microphone?
Yes. Thank you.
Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I am Margareta Cederfelt, member of the Swedish Parliament, and it's a true honor to be here again. I have a question, or maybe it's more of a remark, but I would like to get your response on it. I have met a lot of dictators during my political life, and they are always saying, we are making democracy our way, not yours way. And then they continue and continue. For me, democracy is respect of rule of law, is respect of human rights, is also market economy. I can't find anything of those things in so-called new democracies who say they are doing things their way. And I would like to have your comments on this. And I ask this, raise the question, because it's so dangerous to sit and talk with those people and fall back and agree with them and say, yes, you have your way, that's important, and it's the way forward. Because there is only one way for democracy and peace. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well said. Well, the characteristics of a democracy are pretty simple. First of all, you've got to have free and fair elections. Then you've got to have an independent and free media. And then you've got to have an independent and robust judiciary. If you've got those three things, you've got a functioning democracy. With not, you haven't. And in Moscow, Beijing, Tehran, Pyongyang, and a few other places we can mention, but let's not go into them right now, there's no such thing as democracy, whatever they call it.
I see a question here. Microphone, please.
Good afternoon, Michael Ryan, Friends of Europe in Brussels. Prime Minister Abbott, I have a question for you. Based on your experience as a head of state and government, it's a very busy job with lots of different portfolios. So a lot of the issues we've talked about today are pretty obvious to us and pretty obvious to most people, but yet heads of state and government fail to take resolute action. Mm-hmm. So how can we, civil society and others in government, help you as a head of state and government to get the decision on your agenda, to organize the resources you need to affect actual change, and to get things done? So how can we help you?
Gee whiz. Well, look, people in public life are no different from human beings anywhere. We have a tendency to engage in wishful thinking, and we have a tendency to put off hard decisions. And the reason why there has been this complacency in the face of dictatorships is because to be anything other than complacent is to be forced into making hard decisions and to, for argument's sake, spend less money on butter and more money on guns. And that raises the question, what about the public response? And it's a lot easier to tell the public, nothing to worry about, I've got good news for you, than it is to say to the public, actually, I've got some very bad news for you. If we don't militarily, industrially and culturally rearm, our future could be a lot darker than we'd like to think. That's a difficult message to give people. And one of the problems throughout the Western world right now is a chronic failure of leadership. And to the extent that there is leadership, it tends to be one side of politics bad-mouthing the other side of politics. And sometimes that's justified, but in the end, it's no basis on which to build a stronger and more cohesive country.
Okay, I see another question there. You, yes, please. Come forward and get the mic. And then you. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Katarina. I'm a journalist, but I'll be asking this question as sort of a private citizen and a recent university graduate. There was a lot of interesting points made about the Global South and trying to explain to people in both this panel and the previous how to convince people that the fight, that the good fight that Ukraine is fighting matters. And what I found in my university, located just 3 blocks from the White House, is that to many people, bless you, to many people, the war in Ukraine is not viewed as, hi, Ukraine is fighting for its independence. It's viewed purely from the context of their own politics. And especially the people I've encountered who come from the Global South, who come from countries who have previously been colonized, even when I tell them, hey, you fought for your independence and we're fighting for ours, the resources that, like the Ukrainian grain, it's what feeds your people in the now, they say, not our problem, you're supported by our ex-colonizer, or you are trying to ally yourself with, countries that have killed 1 million Iraqis, and so on and so forth. What do you do to change their mind? Because I've given up, and I don't want to.
Okay, look, think about that. One of you decide who is going to reply. I have 2 more questions. Let's take them together because people are waiting for their reward. a long day for the reception. There is a question here, yes? You wanted to ask a question, and the last one there. And then let's put them together and decide who takes which.
Thank you. My name is Carolina Barrero, and I am a Cuban dissident. I wanted to do a remark and then a question. And the reason why we are here is because we want to make very clear that is the regime, the Cuban regime, the one that stands with Putin. Right now, there are 3,000 Cubans fighting in the war against Ukraine. But the people in Cuba, the oppressed people in Cuba, we stand with Ukraine. And that is something we want to make very clear. Also, the fact that the nuclear submarine is in Havana right now, the fact that Putin says that Cuba is his most strategic ally in Latin America is not a bluff. Putin is not just doing this for solidarity towards Cuba. Of course, Cuba is offering a lot back, and Cuba is a big player that we believe it's been not seen by the European Union in general as this. We believe actually the Cuban regime has advantage because of this in doing the operations for the Russian Federation as they are at this moment. And this is about helping evading sanctions with propaganda, with men on the front, and with the strategic support as well. Right now in the European Union, there is a PDCA agreement signed with Cuba that offers millions of euros in development each year. Cuba is not sanctioned by the European Union, not even Magnitsky sanctions, not the militaries that now receive those warships in the harbor of Havana. They can open bank accounts in all of Europe. And that is being used at the moment. So we are funding the partner of our aggressor, and that there is profound evil in that, and that needs to change because they are obviously playing with us. I was this morning also thinking about the Ukrainian embassy in Havana. What are the Ukrainian diplomats feeling right now? Because the harbor is there. They can go out and see. Actually, it's very sinister, the images of the submarine, like an amphibia coming up the bay. And I haven't seen any response. Why? Why there hasn't been? Because this is an aggression also to them. So these were my remarks, and this is going to be my question also, because when I say support, we cannot change all the boats in any camera in the world, but you must be sure that we will do everything, and that will never change. I mean, Cubans stand with Ukraine, and we are part of this war until the end, which means victory. And I want to make this very clear. But the question is, are you, and when I say you, of course, it's Ukraine and also the European Union, do you think the European Union is ready to open their eyes about Cuba? Is ready to put Cuba in the map of global autocrats? And what can we do to make that happen? Because it's really part of the equation of the victory here.
Thank you for illuminating the situation and for your question. Please think about it. One of you will take that. And the final question. Microphone, please, here. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Ricardo López Aranda. I'm ambassador of Spain to Ukraine. And I want to praise the panelists for their interventions and for this interesting debate. My question is more directed to Ivanna Klympush, but I'm going to do a brief intervention before. The elephant in the room in this debate is what's happening tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, which is the summit in which peace for Ukraine is going to be discussed. And I think here the Ukrainians have done something very clever, which is to turn a discussion on Ukraine into a discussion on what the world should be in a Ukraine which has peace. So they have, the government of Ukraine has presented a peace plan, which is not only a plan for Ukraine, it's a plan for a better world. It is sort of turning the table of the debate. And I want to give homage to the Ukrainian society as a whole for being able to really change the frame of the debate. The government, but also parliamentarians, I know as a witness of their intense activity, and also civil society. They are doing an immense job in changing the frame of the discussion outside. So, my question is, a lot has been done, but what else can be done to change that framework outside, the framework of the debate on Ukraine, from government, but also from civil society and from parliamentarians? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, who's going to, let's take the middle question first. What can the EU do? What should the EU do? Ivanna, you're linked very closely with the EU structures. Could anything be done at this stage?
I didn't expect to speak on behalf of the EU yet.
By default, I'm sorry.
But I hope to be able to do that at some point, not that in that very distant future. We have seen during these years that some really, really tectonic changes have been taking place in the West and in Europe as such. Many things that we never thought, or people would 2.5 years ago think that they are totally impossible already. Historic decisions are already history. So I think if there is a concerted effort to highlight the role, in this particular case, the autocratic, dictatorial, but active, engaged in this axis of evil role of Cuba, I think even here we have a couple of very capable European MPs that could already try to take this to the attention of their governments, and that's only concerted effort is going to help us. But maybe I'll just also briefly respond to what Ambassador was asking about. What can be done? We, as you were saying, we are coordinating between the parliament, the government, the civil society right now. We are, for example, coordinating with civil society organizations, and together with Alexander Mereshko, we've participated in a couple briefings for journalists coming from Asian countries, coming from Latin American countries, coming from hopefully coming from African countries. And I think that if we could organize just loads of this visits to Ukraine by journalists, believe me, after visiting Ukraine, they're coming with totally different understanding of what their perception was. But the problem is, and now we are encountering a very basic problem. In order for African journalists to come to Ukraine, they need 2 visas. One from Ukraine, which takes 6 weeks, and then another one from Poland, through which they will be traveling. That takes another 6 weeks. So we've been planning to bring them for already half a year. They either get one visa, they don't get another visa. So, I mean, if we are serious about changing the perception, for example, in Africa, so let's take a concerted effort with very, very practical coordination efforts between the Ukrainians, Ukrainian parliament, Ukrainian government, and our friends. So even such practicalities matter. And I think that means that we on the kind of higher level would need to prioritize, okay, we can do this and this and this and this, and then make sure that we provide all the possibilities that this is happening.
Any more answers to the questions posed? No, people are getting tired. Okay, the information in the questions was already sufficient. Let me give you a breather. We have one ambassador here of Spain. Any other ambassadors in the audience?
Another ambassador right
from
there, the French ambassador.
The French?
Yeah, they
are. Oh, vive la France. Gentlemen, can we ask you briefly to tell us how the European elections might impact on support for Ukraine? Is it a game changer, or is it simply crisis management at this stage? if you would be so kind as to share that information, I think it would be worth us hearing from you. Could you give the microphone to the ambassador, please? Vous êtes prête?
I'll start to let my French colleague more time to prepare.
Well, it's more complicated there.
But, you know, when President Zelensky went 2 weeks ago to Madrid to sign the security agreement, he had a meeting with all the parliamentary leaders of the parliament, of the Congress of Deputies and of the Senate, and all of them, including our far right, expressed their support for Ukraine. So on our side, you don't have anything to worry about.
Bon, gracias, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. Can you give him the microphone? Who's giving the microphone? Take mine, Monsieur.
Merci beaucoup. Maybe it's better if I speak English, though. But thank you for the gesture. Well, actually, if you look at the results of the European elections, as far as European parties or European sections in the European Parliament are concerned, you have quite a stable majority if they manage to prolong the existing practice of a kind of alliance in the center. And the strongest party is again EPP, so nothing much change here. Then, of course, so situations might be different in some countries. In my country, actually, there is a kind of interrogation because my president decided to call for snap elections, general elections in France, which are going to happen the 13th of June and the 7th of July. And that, of course, may have an impact, at least on the French situation. But, of course, you would understand that I am in no position to speculate on that, by definition. So we'll see. One thing is certain, and it is that in my country, when you poll support to Ukraine, there is no Ukraine fatigue. There is still strong support to Ukraine and still strong support to provide additional support, including military support to Ukraine, which is, of course, reassuring for us. And maybe I'll stop here. Thanks a lot.
Merci beaucoup.
Yes, I would like to give a comment as well. Thank you. I would like to give a comment as well. Margareta Cederfelt, member of the Swedish Parliament. And what I would like to add is that there is a divided power in the European Union. There is the Commission. There are negotiations going on. The member countries will appoint their candidates to be commissioners. There is the Ministerial Council. There is no changes in the majority of member countries. And then there is the European Parliament. And let's see what the outcome will be. But I have a lot of hope for a good outcome because of the division of power. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think more or less we can wrap this up. I thank our esteemed speakers, prime ministers, parliamentarians, human rights activists. I don't think I have to name you all. Your names are behind you. I think it was a very interesting discussion, lots of insights, lots of ideas. Give them a round of applause, please. And please stay now for the wrap-up, which is going to be done, I think, also by the former Prime Minister, yes? Wrapping up with who is it? You're tired. You're running on a different time schedule, aren't you? You're on Australian time. Okay. Who is supposed to be doing the wrap-up? Organizers. Where's Alexei? He's coming. Okay, bear with us for 2 more minutes and we'll have a pause until tomorrow. Anybody like to come and sing while we're waiting? I did it my way, no? Or Tiny Kangaroo Down Boy? No. Organizers, please, save us. Time to adjourn. I think there is a revolt here. The population is getting restive. Please.
I'm so sorry. Good evening. My name is Marina. I'm one of the organizers here. It is such a pleasure to see everyone here. So we're just waiting for several final remarks. And in the meantime, as for the reception, which is right after this, it's like 5 minutes from the location. So don't worry. Yeah. And I'm just giving the floor.
Thank you very much. Dear friends, first of all, I would like to thank all of you for your strength. I understand it was not an easy, long day, but I think it was extremely interesting. And first of all, let us thank our panelists and moderators. Thank you. And now I have an honor. No, I will do it. Okay, so first, and now I have an honor to close the first day of our forum and invite you for our reception, which will take place just several minutes from here. So just follow, please, us, and we will have a possibility in not formal situation to discuss what we can take from what we heard today. And I think we have a lot to discuss. Once again, thanks to everybody for your patience, for your strength, to moderators, to speakers. Thank you very much.